And now we finally arrive at Detroit. I produced a book this spring called Detroit Disassembled, and also had a large exhibit at the Akron Museum of Art. But the work started in very early 2008, and I arrived at Detroit at the invitation of some young urban explorers who had come to know the city quite well, and were also familiar with my work of theaters and sort of abandoned places, and thought I might like to join them. So in this picture, we see the man in the hoodie with Detroit on it. He was actually 16 years old when I met him, and he was one of my chief guides to the city. He knew every building, he knew every architect, he knew how to get in and what had happened to them. I mean, there were some, and he was, as I said, a high school student when I met him. The main artery running sort of slightly to the left and back is Woodward Avenue, which at some points is 8 lanes wide. Detroit was a car city, was meant for cars. It's the largest city in America without any kind of public transportation system. What really astonished me when I started working in Detroit was the vast quantity of abandonment. I've read that there's something like 16,000 empty single-family homes in Detroit. But beyond that, there are hundreds of apartment buildings, factories, libraries, hospitals, schools, churches, and they pockmark literally the entire city, although there are some areas where it's much more concentrated. And yet, amidst that ruin, there are incredibly iconic buildings that are so historically important and so metaphorically rich, I would say. One of them being the Michigan Central Station. This actually, in the lower part of the frame, what you're actually seeing is snow that's drifted in through all the broken windows. It's not dust, it's actually snow. And of course, what's interesting is that these were modeled on the great works of Rome, but in some ways, in their current condition, they've kind of returned to what the Roman ruins look like today. And this, which is an interior in the Ford Rouge plant, which was at one time the greatest industrial complex in the world. Another car plant is the Packard Motor Car Company, which actually closed in the 1950s and has had various uses over the years. But it's so big that it is in fact still being mined, scrapped by people coming in and cutting out various I-beams and so forth and so on. And as they do it, the buildings start to collapse around them. So that the collapsing building in the back is because people have been slowly taking out the steel. The Boblo boat, which would make trips downriver to this island amusement park, and was a kind of fantastic voyage. I mean, it's where romances started and people had their first kiss and so forth. And now here it is parked, looking like a ghost ship. They tried to preserve it and shrink wrap it, and now the shrink wrap has kind of fallen off, and that's why it has this kind of ghostly effect. And here, this is a detail in the old Castech High School, which was the premier high school of Detroit. There was a classroom, I believe in a chemistry lab, where some vandal, scrapper, kid set a fire, and the heat was so intense that it actually melted the thin plastic face of this clock. I mean, one of those standard clocks you have in all these classrooms. It left the glass and the metal alone, and so you literally have the face of time dripping over the hands of this clock. The abandoned, empty cocktail lounge of the Detroit Boat Club, which is on beautiful Belle Isle. This building was owned by the Detroit Dry Dock Company, which made steam engines for boats, like the Boblo boat, and is really one of the great late 19th century industrial buildings of Detroit. It's on the waterfront. And it's also a building where young Henry Ford, as an apprentice, first learned about the combustion engine. And today, it's literally the home of this one guy who, has his little fire and this shimmering water-like thing is actually a huge plastic kind of windscreen, perhaps even a vent for his fire. So speaking of Henry Ford, this is his office from when the Model T Ford was being built. What I assume was a wool carpet that over time decayed and provided this fertile bed for this kind of sea of moss to emerge. So, as you see, there was a theme that started to develop that I hadn't planned on, but as I was shooting in Detroit, I realized that nature is beginning to recycle all these works of man, has begun to sort of reconquer the city. And one profound example of that is this, which this is a building that was originally a post office, a large open warehouse, and then was taken over by the Detroit Public School System as their book repository. And then at some point in the 80s, there was a shooting and there was a fire, and the Detroit Public System, the Detroit Public School System moved out of the building, but pretty much left all the report cards, the school supplies, the construction paper. I mean, there are just huge pallets of paper lying throughout this building. And on the top floor, the vandals came in and took out all the metal from the windows and so forth, and rain and fire. And today, there's a grove of birch trees growing out of these decayed books. So I think that this sort of recycling of man by nature and the works of man really puts all Detroit's decline into kind of poignant perspective. But it is still an occupied city. Detroit is not a ghost town. There are people who live there. There are people who are very loyal to the city. There are very resourceful people who are now trying to figure out what to do with these buildings and how to reuse them and readapt them. And I would say one of the things that really impressed me was the sort of resilience of those people. There was a group called Object Orange, and they went to Home Depot and bought the cheapest orange paint they could find and would go out at night with rollers and paint burnt out, derelict houses orange. And then in the city, people would wake up and see these bright orange houses. And so the city would immediately tear the house down that had been painted orange. And this evolved into kind of a cat and mouse game with the city of Detroit, where they kept painting and then tearing down and painting and tearing down. And then at one point, they ended up painting these houses in Highland Park. And Highland Park, which is a small sort of township within Detroit itself, went bankrupt, I believe, about 8 years ago. And so they actually didn't have the money to tear these houses down. But there's a lot of writing everywhere in Detroit. There's a lot of, even though these buildings are emptied and ruined, and they're not, there are people making art in them, making films, making pieces of sculpture, taking up, there's even, talked to a friend of mine, there's a Dutch artist now going there collecting pieces of wood to make works of art back in Holland. There's all kinds of things that's happening to them. So they're not exactly inert, static. There's always something shifting, changing about them. But the future of Detroit really lies with the resourcefulness and the imaginative quality of its inhabitants' ability to really reimagine itself.